Hey, Hedge. I never thought I'd be that guy posting about his marriage falling apart, but here we are. I feel like I'm drowning, and I don't know who to turn to. My wife, Lisa, and I have been married for 10 years, and we have two amazing kids, Emma, 8, and Jacob, 5. I thought we were solid, you know? Sure, there were ups and downs, but nothing out of the ordinary, or so I believed. Things started to feel off about 6 months ago. Lisa became distant, like emotionally checked out. She used to light up when I walked into her room, but now she barely even looks at me. At first, I chalked it up to stress. She recently got promoted to kitchen manager at this trendy downtown restaurant, so I figured the long hours were taking a toll. But then, she started staying late way more than she needed to. It's inventory night, she'd say, or the boss needs me to close again. I wanted to be supportive, but something didn't sit right. She started dressing nicer than usual for work. New outfits, a little more makeup than I'd seen her wear in years. One time, she even left the house wearing perfume, and Lisa is not a perfume-wearing type of person. I shrugged it off, trying not to jump to conclusions, but it was like a tiny alarm bell had gone off in my head. Then came the late-night texting. She used to leave her phone lying around, but suddenly, it was glued to her side. I'd catch glimpses of her grinning at the screen, typing furiously, then flipping the phone face down the second I walked into the room. When I asked her about it, she rolled her eyes and said, "It's just work stuff. You're so paranoid." I tried to believe her. I wanted to believe her. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that IT wasn't just the phone anymore. Over the next few weeks, Lisa's behavior became even harder to ignore. She started going out on her nights off, which was odd because Lisa used to hate nightlife. "I'm grabbing drinks with some co-workers," she'd say with this fake cheery tone, as if over-explaining would make it sound more believable. When I'd suggest coming along, she'd shut it down. "It's just a work thing. You wouldn't have fun." One night, she came home way past midnight, smelling like booze and something else I couldn't quite place. I asked her how her night was, and she just laughed it off, saying, "It was fine. Why are you waiting up like my dad or something?" But the kicker? It was her excuse for being unreachable. She claimed her phone died, which didn't make sense because I'd literally seen her leave the house with a portable charger in her bag. I tried brushing it off, thinking maybe I was overthinking again, but the lies were starting to pile up. And they were bad lies, lazy ones, the kind that insult your intelligence. Then came the first real blow. One Saturday afternoon, I got a call from a mutual friend of ours, Jamie. Jamie works in the same restaurant as Lisa, and she's one of those no-filter types who will tell it like it is, even if it's uncomfortable. "Hey, I don't want to stir the pot, but you should know something," Jamie said, her voice hesitant. "Lisa's been spending a lot of time with this guy at work. Marcus. They're close. Like way too close." My stomach dropped. "Close how?" Jamie sighed like she didn't want to say it, but felt like she had to. "I've seen them sneak off during breaks. And last week, they were in the storage room together for over an hour. Everyone's talking about it." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Marcus was one of the line cooks, young, single, and known for being a bit of a player. I'd met him once at a work party, and he'd been overly friendly with Lisa. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now everything clicked into place. When Lisa got home that night, I couldn't even look at her without my mind replaying Jamie's words. I wanted to ask her about Marcus right then and there, but I held back. I needed proof before I confronted her. If I came at her without solid evidence, she'd just spin it around and make me feel like the crazy one. So I decided to wait, to watch, and to dig deeper. Something told me the truth was worse than I could even imagine. The next week, I couldn't focus on anything. Every time Lisa left for work, my thoughts spiraled. Was she meeting Marcus? Was every "I love you" just another lie? The idea of her with him, laughing, touching, and doing God knows what, twisted my stomach into knots. I knew I couldn't let this continue. I needed the truth. One night while Lisa was in the shower, I grabbed her phone. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it, the guilt already settling in. I knew her passcode. She'd never bothered to change it, assuming I'd never snoop. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Her messages and call logs were clean. Too clean. That only made me more suspicious. Then I checked the hidden photos folder. What I found turned my blood cold. There were pictures of Lisa and Marcus in the restaurant's kitchen, standing far closer than any coworkers should. One of them showed him with his arm around her waist while she leaned into him, grinning like she didn't have a care in the world. Then there were photos of them in our kitchen, the kitchen where I made dinner for our family. She had brought him here, into my home. I scrolled further and found screenshots of texts between them. The tone was unmistakable, flirty, intimate. In one message, she'd written, "Last night was incredible. I can't wait to do it again." I couldn't keep reading. I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling, feeling the walls close in around me. Later that night, while Lisa slept, I grabbed my car keys and left. I didn't know where I was going, but I ended up near her workplace. The restaurant was closed, but lights were still on inside. I parked across the street and waited, unsure of what I was even hoping to see. I didn't have to wait long. The back door opened, and Lisa walked out with Marcus. They were laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. He leaned in close, said something, and she lightly shoved him in that playful way I used to know so well. Then he kissed her. Not a quick kiss either. It was long and slow, the kind that left no room for doubt. I froze. It was like my brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. The two of them stood there for a few moments, completely unaware of my car parked across the street. She touched his face before they walked to their cars. They didn't even drive off together, just two separate cars going in different directions, as if that would make it less obvious. I stayed parked there for what felt like hours. I couldn't bring myself to go home right away. I just sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. Everything, the late nights, the sudden coldness, the evasive answers, all of it clicked into place. I felt stupid for ever doubting my instincts. When I finally got home, she was already in bed, fast asleep, or at least pretending to be. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and stared at her. It felt unreal that the person I had shared my life with for over a decade could look so calm and peaceful after doing what she had done. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My mind kept replaying the image of them together, over and over, while I lay there in the dark, wondering what to do next. The next morning, I woke up with a pit in my stomach. Lisa was in the kitchen, humming as she made coffee, acting like everything was perfectly normal. I watched her from the hallway, the same way someone might watch a stranger. It was surreal, seeing her move around so casually, so completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I didn't say anything at first. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the other part wanted to see how far she'd go with the lies. So I stayed quiet, observing her like I was watching a performance. "Morning," she said when she noticed me. "You okay? You look tired." "I didn't sleep much," I replied, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. She smiled faintly and went back to stirring her coffee. I wanted to rip that smile off her face. How could she act like everything was fine? How could she pretend nothing had changed when she was sneaking around with Marcus behind my back? The entire day was a blur. I went through the motions, taking care of the kids, running errands, and avoiding Lisa as much as possible. Every time she came near me, my chest tightened with anger and betrayal. It felt like I was holding back a tidal wave of emotions, and I knew I couldn't keep it bottled up much longer. That evening, after we put the kids to bed, I decided it was time. I found Lisa sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone. The sight of her texting, probably Marcus, made my blood boil. "We need to talk," I said, standing in the doorway. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "About what?" "About you. About us. About what you've been doing behind my back." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't panic. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice steady but defensive. I took a deep breath and stepped closer. "I know about Marcus. I know about the late nights, the texts, the photos. I know everything." Her face drained of color, but she quickly tried to recover. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, shaking her head. "You're being ridiculous." "Don't," I snapped. "Don't insult me by pretending you don't know. I've seen the messages. I saw the pictures. I saw the two of you at the restaurant last night." The room went silent. Lisa stared at me, her mouth slightly open, but no words came out. For a moment, I thought she might finally admit it, but instead, she doubled down. "You're paranoid," she said, her voice rising. "You've been imagining things. Do you even hear how crazy you sound right now?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was lying to my face, even with all the evidence I had. "Cut the act, Lisa," I said, my voice firm. "You've been cheating on me. Don't make this worse by denying it." Her expression shifted from defensive to angry. "Oh, so now you're spying on me? Going through my phone, stalking me at work? That's disgusting, you know that? Maybe the problem isn't me, it's you." I clenched my fist, trying to keep my anger in check. "This isn't about me," I said through gritted teeth. "This is about you betraying our marriage. You've been sneaking around with another man, lying to me, and bringing him into our home. Do you have any idea how much damage you've done?" Lisa's anger faltered, and for the first time, she looked genuinely shaken. But instead of apologizing, she turned cold. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "You never have." "What don't I understand?" I asked, my voice rising. "That you're unhappy? That you're bored? Fine, tell me. But don't act like that justifies what you've done." She didn't answer. She just stared at the floor, her jaw tight, as if she was trying to hold back whatever she really wanted to say. The silence was deafening. Finally, she stood up and walked past me, without a word, heading toward the bedroom. I let her go, too drained to push any further. I knew this wasn't over, far from it. But for now, I needed to step back before I said something I couldn't take back. That night, I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling and wondering how we had gotten here. How had the woman I loved become a stranger? And what was I supposed to do now? The next morning, the house was silent. Lisa avoided me completely, staying holed up in the bedroom while I got the kids ready for school. I tried to act normal for their sake, but inside, I was seething. Every time I saw her door closed, it was like a wall being built between us. The lies, the betrayal, it was all too much. When the kids were finally out the door, I decided I couldn't let this go on any longer. I walked into the bedroom and found Lisa sitting on the bed, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She looked up when I entered, her face a mix of annoyance and unease. "We're not done talking," I said, shutting the door behind me. "I don't have anything else to say," she replied coldly. "You've already made up your mind about me." "Because the evidence is right in front of me," I snapped. "Lisa, stop lying. Just tell me the truth for once." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she'd dig in her heels again. But then something in her expression shifted, like she was too tired to keep up the act. She sighed and put her phone down. "Fine," she said quietly. "You want the truth?" "Yes. I've been seeing Marcus. Are you happy now?" The words hit me like a truck, even though I already knew. Hearing her admit it out loud made it feel real in a way I wasn't ready for. "How long?" I asked, my voice low and tense. "How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, then muttered, "A few months." "A few months?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me, to our kids for months? Bringing him into our house, into our lives, while I was here trying to hold everything together." Lisa looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice defensive. "It wasn't about love or some stupid fantasy. It was different." "What does that even mean?" I asked, throwing up my hands. "You betrayed me, Lisa. You betrayed our marriage, our family. What could possibly justify that?" She stood up suddenly, her face hardening. "You want to know why?" she said, her voice shaking. "Fine, I'll tell you. I've been miserable, okay? Miserable. And you don't even notice. You're so caught up in your own little world that you don't even see me anymore. You still have to hear, stunt. So, this is my fault now?" "I'm not saying it's your fault," she snapped. "But you don't get to play the victim here, either. Do you even realize how distant you've been? How cold? It's like you don't even care anymore." Her words stung, but I refused to let her twist this around. "If I've been distant, it's because I've been working my butt off to provide for this family," I shot back. "To give you and the kids the life you wanted. And this is how you repay me? By running off with some guy who doesn't even care about you." Lisa flinched, but she didn't back down. "Marcus made me feel seen," she said quietly. "He made me feel like I mattered." Her words were like a knife to the chest. And what about me? Did I matter? Did our kids matter when you were sneaking around with him? Her face crumpled for a moment, and I thought I saw a flicker of guilt, but then she steeled herself. You don't understand, she said, her voice hollow. It wasn't just about Marcus. It was about everything. I felt trapped for so long, and I needed something. I couldn't listen anymore. I turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My head was spinning, my emotions a mix of rage, heartbreak, and complete disbelief. Lisa's excuses, her attempt to blame me, only made the betrayal worse. I sat in the living room, staring at the family photos on the wall. The smiling faces in those pictures felt like a cruel joke now. Everything I thought we had, everything I'd worked so hard to build, was crumbling before my eyes. And the worst part? I didn't know if I could ever put the pieces back together. After Lisa's confession, I couldn't even look at her. I avoided her for the rest of the day. But the weight of her betrayal followed me everywhere. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marcus's face. Every word she said replayed in my head, gnawing at me. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where she had been with him. My mind was a storm of questions. How many times had they been here? How far had it gone? Why wasn't I enough? I needed to know, even if it destroyed me. Lisa walked into the kitchen, her face a mask of exhaustion. She stopped when she saw me sitting there and sighed. Are we really going to do this again? She asked, sounding more annoyed than remorseful. Yes, I said firmly. We are, because I'm not letting this go until I have the full truth. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from me, her arms crossed defensively. What else do you want to know? I already told you, yes, I was seeing Marcus. It's over now. Can't we just leave it at that? I leaned forward, my voice steady but cold. I want to know everything. Where? When? How many times? I want the truth, Lisa. Not the version you think will make me stop asking. She hesitated, her eyes darting away. You really want all the details? She asked, almost daring me to back off. Yes, I said without hesitation. I deserve to know what I've been living with. She took a deep breath and began talking, her voice flat and detached, like she was describing something that had happened to someone else. It started at work. A few late nights, some flirting. One thing led to another. The first time, it happened in the kitchen at work, after hours. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't interrupt. I needed to hear it all. It wasn't just at work, she continued. It happened here, in the house, when you were at work and the kids were at school. I felt the air leave my lungs. The betrayal wasn't just emotional or physical. It was everywhere. In my home, in the space I thought was sacred. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my emotions in check. How many times? I asked through gritted teeth. Lisa hesitated again. I don't know. A few times. A few. I shot back. Or more than a few. She avoided my eyes, and that was all the confirmation I needed. My anger bubbled over. But before I could say anything, she dropped another bombshell. It wasn't just Marcus, she said quietly. I froze. What do you mean it wasn't just Marcus? Her face crumpled, and for a second, I thought she might actually cry. There were others, she admitted. It didn't mean anything. I didn't know how to stop. Her words didn't register at first. Others, I repeated, my voice shaking. How many others? She shook her head, tears finally spilling over. It doesn't matter. It was never about them. It was about me feeling. I slammed my hand on the table, cutting her off. Don't you dare try to justify this. You brought strangers into our lives, into our home, and you expect me to just accept that. Lisa sobbed quietly, but I didn't care. Her tears meant nothing to me anymore. You had everything, I said, my voice breaking. A husband who loved you, kids who adored you, and you threw it all away for. What? A thrill? Her next words shattered me completely. I felt broken, she whispered, and being with them made me feel less broken. It wasn't about you. I stood up, unable to stay in the same room with her any longer. Her excuses, her attempts to paint herself as the victim, were too much. You didn't just break yourself, Lisa. I said, my voice cold. You broke all of us. I walked out of the kitchen, her cries following me down the hall. For the first time, I realized that the woman I had loved for over a decade was gone, and I wasn't sure if I could ever find her again, or if I even wanted to. The next morning, I barely spoke to Lisa. The air in the house was suffocating. She kept her distance, but her presence felt like a heavy shadow lingering over everything. I avoided her, pouring all my energy into the kids. They didn't need to know what was happening, at least not yet, but I could already feel the cracks starting to show. Emma was the first to notice. "Daddy, are you and Mommy mad at each other?" she asked while eating breakfast. Her big, innocent eyes stared at me, and I had to force a smile to reassure her. "Of course not, sweetheart," I lied. "Mommy and I are just tired. That's all." Emma didn't look convinced, but thankfully, Jacob distracted her by spilling milk all over the table. I cleaned it up, grateful for the interruption, but deep down, I knew this fragile facade wouldn't last long. Kids aren't stupid. They can sense when something's wrong. That afternoon, I took the kids to the park, needing some space to think. Watching them run around, laughing and playing, felt bittersweet. They were so happy, so unaware of the storm brewing around them. All I could think about was how Lisa's choices would impact them. They deserved better. They deserved stability, a family they could trust. And I wasn't sure if Lisa and I could give them that anymore. When we got home, Lisa was waiting in the living room. Her face was puffy from crying, but I had no sympathy left to give her. "We need to talk about the kids," I said, cutting straight to the point. Her eyes widened slightly, and she nodded. "Okay, what about them?" "They're going to notice something's wrong," I said. "If this keeps up, they're going to start asking questions. We need to figure out how we're going to handle this." Lisa looked down, twisting her hands nervously. "I don't want them to know," she said softly. "They're too young to understand." I shook my head. "They don't need to know the details, but they're not blind, Lisa. They can feel the tension. If we don't address it, they'll make up their own stories, and that could be worse." Her voice cracked as she spoke. "What are you saying? Are you going to tell them everything?" "No," I said firmly. "I never put that on them. But if things don't change, we'll have to tell them something. I'm not going to lie to them forever." Lisa's tears started again, but I didn't have the patience for it. "This isn't about you anymore," I said coldly. "It's about them. You've already done enough damage to this family." Her sobs grew louder, and she buried her face in her hands. "I know I've messed up," she said through her tears. "I know I've hurt you and them, but I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if I can." I stared at her, the woman I had once thought was my partner, my teammate. Now, all I saw was someone who had shattered everything we'd built together. "Maybe you can't," I said quietly. "Maybe it's too late." The silence between us was deafening. I wanted to feel anger, but all I felt was an overwhelming sadness. For me, for her, and especially for the kids. That night, after putting Emma and Jacob to bed, I sat alone in the living room. Lisa stayed in the bedroom, giving me space, but it didn't help. The house felt like a hollow shell of what it used to be, and I had no idea how to rebuild it. The reality was sinking in. This wasn't just about Lisa and me anymore. This was about the kids. And no matter how much she had hurt me, I had to figure out what was best for them. A few days later, everything came to a head. The tension in the house was unbearable, and Lisa and I were barely speaking. When we did talk, it was either about the kids or an argument simmering just below the surface. I was running out of patience, and the betrayal felt like a constant weight pressing down on me. That evening, after dinner, I was helping Emma with her homework when Lisa walked into the kitchen. She stood there for a moment, watching us, and then cleared her throat. "Can we talk?" she said, her voice quiet but firm. I glanced at Emma, who was happily coloring in her workbook, oblivious to the storm brewing between her parents. "Not here," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We'll talk after the kids are in bed." Lisa nodded and walked out without another word. I hated how her presence felt like a dark cloud now, something I never thought I'd feel about the woman I used to love so deeply. Once the kids were asleep, I found Lisa waiting for me in the living room. She looked nervous, like she knew what was coming. I sat down across from her, bracing myself for whatever she had to say. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "About the kids, about everything I've done. And I need to be honest with you." My chest tightened. "Go on." She took a deep breath, avoiding my eyes. "It's not just that I cheated. It's why I did it. I know it doesn't excuse anything, but I think you deserve to know." "Why?" I asked flatly, not sure I wanted to hear her answer. Lisa hesitated, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "It's because I felt broken," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I felt like I wasn't enough, like I couldn't be happy in my own skin." I stared at her, waiting for her to explain further. She looked up at me, her eyes glassy, with unshed tears. "And part of it," she continued, "was because I didn't feel satisfied in our marriage. Physically." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. I sat there, stunned, as she quickly added, "I know that sounds horrible. I know it does. But it wasn't just about that. It was about feeling like I could escape from the version of myself I hated." "So, you slept with someone else because of what?" My voice was quiet, but the anger simmered just below the surface. Lisa winced. "It's not just that," she said. "But yes, it played a part. I hate myself for saying it, but it's the truth. I thought I could ignore it, but after a while, it started eating away at me." I stood up abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. "So you destroyed our family because you couldn't handle your own insecurities?" I said, my voice rising. "And instead of talking to me, instead of trying to work through it, you ran to someone else?" "I tried to talk to you," she shot back, standing up too. "But you never listened. You were always too busy, too distracted. And every time I brought it up, you'd brush me off like it didn't matter." "That's your excuse?" I shouted. "That I didn't pick up on your hints, so you decided to blow up our lives?" Lisa's tears started again, but they didn't move me. "I didn't want it to happen," she sobbed. "I didn't plan for any of this. But it happened, and I can't take it back." I turned away, running a hand through my hair, trying to calm myself. Her words kept replaying in my mind. She had just confirmed the one thing I had been too afraid to confront. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice, one she had made again and again. "Do you even understand what you've done?" I said, my voice trembling with anger. "This isn't just about us. It's about Emma and Jacob. It's about their future, their trust in us as parents. You've torn apart everything we built. And for what?" Lisa didn't respond. She just stood there, crying softly, as the reality of her actions hung heavy in the air. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, slamming it behind me. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get out of that house. Out of the suffocating mess she had created. Out of the life I thought I knew, but now realized was a lie. As I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets, one thing became clear. This wasn't something I could fix. Lisa had crossed the line, and there was no going back. That I stayed out most of the night, driving around aimlessly. The quiet of the road was the only thing that kept me from breaking down completely. By the time I finally pulled back into the driveway, it was close to sunrise. The house was dark and silent, but I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in the car, staring at the home I had worked so hard to build, a home that now felt like a stranger's house. When I eventually walked through the door, Lisa was asleep on the couch. Her face looked worn, like the weight of everything was finally sinking in. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered her words from the night before and the betrayal they carried. Whatever pity I felt evaporated. Over the next few days, I focused on one thing: my kids. They were my only priority now. I wasn't going to let them be collateral damage in this disaster. Every moment I spent with them felt bittersweet, like I was trying to hold on to what was left of our family before it all came crashing down. But the more I thought about the future, the more it became clear that Lisa couldn't stay in their lives the way she was now. She had made choices that showed how little she valued the family we had built, and I couldn't trust her to be the parent they needed. The thought of splitting custody, of having Emma and Jacob grow up shuffling between two homes while their mother prioritized her selfish desires, was unbearable. I decided I needed to file for full custody. It wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but Lisa had left me no choice. I didn't want my kids caught up in her mess or exposed to the kind of behavior she had normalized for herself. They deserved stability, love, and a parent they could depend on, and right now, that wasn't her. I called a lawyer the next morning. He came highly recommended by a friend and was known for being tough in family court. When I explained the situation, he didn't sugarcoat it. "You have a strong case," he said, "but be prepared for a fight. Custody battles are never clean, and they'll try to paint you as controlling or vindictive." "I don't care," I replied. "This isn't about revenge. It's about what's best for my kids." Over the next week, I worked tirelessly to gather evidence. Every text, every hidden photo, every instance of Lisa's reckless behavior. I documented it all. I even reached out to Jamie, the friend who had tipped me off about Lisa and Marcus. She agreed to provide a statement about what she had witnessed at the restaurant, which would strengthen my case. When I finally confronted Lisa about my decision to file, she looked at me like I had just slapped her. "You're taking the kids away from me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I'm doing what's best for them," I said coldly. "They deserve better than this. Better than a mother who brings strangers into their home and lies about it." Her expression hardened. "You think you're some perfect parent? You're not. You're just using this as a way to punish me." "This isn't about you," I shot back. "It's about protecting Emma and Jacob from the fallout of your choices. You did this, Lisa, not me." The conversation devolved into shouting, but I stayed firm. I wasn't backing down. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a sense of purpose, a plan to take control of the chaos she had unleashed. Filing for custody wasn't just about the legal battle. It was about drawing a line in the sand, about refusing to let her destroy anything else. I was done being a bystander in my own life. Lisa had made her choices, and now I was making mine. Once the papers were filed, things escalated quickly. Lisa went from crying and apologizing to cold and combative. It was like she had flipped a switch. She accused me of trying to ruin her life, of turning the kids against her, and of being the reason she had felt pushed into her actions in the first place. Every conversation turned into a shouting match, and the tension in the house became unbearable. One night, after another blowout argument, Lisa said something I'll never forget. "You think you're better than me? You're not. You're just as broken as I am, and the kids are too. They're already as damaged as we are." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. She was talking about Emma and Jacob, our children, as if they were collateral in the wreckage of her choices. I couldn't believe the callousness, the complete disregard for their innocence. It was like she had given up on them, given up on all of us. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just stared at her, realizing that the woman I thought I knew was gone. This wasn't the Lisa I had married, the mother of my children. This was someone else, someone I didn't recognize and couldn't forgive. That night, I moved into the guest room. Sharing the same space with her felt impossible. The next morning, I started looking for an apartment. I wasn't going to keep living in this toxic environment, not for myself and not for the kids. If the court granted me full custody, I needed a place where we could start fresh, away from the chaos Lisa had created. Lisa, of course, didn't make things easy. When she found out about the apartment, she accused me of abandoning her. "You're leaving me to rot here while you play the hero for the kids," she spat. "Don't think they won't grow up hating you for tearing this family apart." I didn't rise to the bait. I'd learned by then that arguing with her was pointless. Her words weren't about me. They were about her guilt, her anger, her refusal to take responsibility. I wasn't going to let her drag me into her spiral. The real breaking point came a few days later, when Lisa did something I never thought she'd do. She left. One night, she packed a bag, walked out the door, and didn't come back. No explanation, no note, just gone. I woke up the next morning to find Emma and Jacob sitting on the couch, confused and scared. "Where's Mommy?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. I hugged them both and promised them that everything would be okay, even though I didn't believe it myself. Inside, I was furious. Lisa had walked out on her own children, her flesh and blood, because she couldn't handle the consequences of her actions. That day, I called my lawyer to update him on what had happened. "This is significant," he said. Abandoning the family will weigh heavily in your favor during the custody hearing. But it didn't feel like a victory. I wasn't celebrating the fact that Lisa had essentially handed me the case. All I felt was sadness for my kids, who had just learned in the harshest way possible that their mother's love wasn't enough to keep her here. When Lisa finally resurfaced a few days later, she acted as if nothing had happened. "I needed space," she said casually, as if walking out on her family was no big deal. "You wouldn't understand." "You're right," I said coldly. I don't understand. I don't understand how you can look at your own kids and see anything other than the best parts of yourself. But if you're so willing to walk away from them, maybe you don't deserve to be their mother." Her face twisted in anger. "You're not taking them from me." "I'm not," I said. "You already did that yourself." Lisa stormed off, slamming the door behind her. I didn't chase after her. I didn't need to. I had everything I needed to protect my kids and move forward. Lisa's actions had sealed her fate, and there was no coming back from it. After Lisa's abrupt disappearance and her casual return days later, I knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to take responsibility for anything. Her behavior had shifted from anger to indifference, as if the family she'd built was nothing more than a fleeting phase she was eager to leave behind. I channeled all my energy into preparing for the custody hearing. The stakes couldn't have been higher. My lawyer, Mike, assured me that we had a solid case, especially with Lisa's erratic behavior and her temporary abandonment of the kids. But family court is unpredictable, and I couldn't afford to leave anything to chance. We compiled everything: the evidence of her infidelity, the messages I'd saved, and testimony from Jamie about Lisa's conduct at work. Mike explained that while the cheating itself wasn't enough to sway custody, it showed a pattern of recklessness that the judge wouldn't ignore. And then there was the abandonment, that Mike said would be the nail in the coffin. Meanwhile, I had to keep life as normal as possible for Emma and Jacob. They knew something was wrong. Emma, in particular, was picking up on the tension between Lisa and me. One evening, as I was tucking her into bed, she asked, "Daddy, are you and Mommy getting a divorce?" Her question hit me like a brick. I knelt down beside her bed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mommy and I are trying to figure some things out," I said carefully. "But no matter what happens, we both love you and Jacob more than anything." Emma nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "I just don't want us to stop being a family," she whispered. I hugged her tightly, my heart breaking. "We'll always be a family," I promised. "It might look different, but you and Jacob are what matter most. And that will never change." As the court date approached, Lisa's behavior became more erratic. One moment, she was pleading for forgiveness, claiming she wanted to fix things. The next, she was lashing out, accusing me of trying to ruin her life by taking the kids. One night, she confronted me in the kitchen, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you're some saint, don't you?" she spat. "Like you've never made mistakes. You're not perfect, and the court will see that." I didn't take the bait. "This isn't about being perfect," I said calmly. "It's about what's best for Emma and Jacob. And right now, that's not you." Her face twisted in fury. "You think they're better off with you? You're so obsessed with being the good guy that you don't even see how controlling you are. The kids will hate you for this." Her words stung, but I kept my composure. "This isn't about me, and it's not about you. It's about them," I said. "And the choices you've made speak for themselves." Lisa stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, gripping the counter, trying to steady myself. Her anger didn't scare me. It just made me more determined. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it because I couldn't trust her to put our children first. The day before the hearing, Mike and I went over the case one last time. He was confident, but I couldn't shake the nerves. This wasn't just a legal fight. It was my entire future, my kids' future. I wasn't just trying to win custody. I was fighting for the stability and happiness they deserved. That night, as I tucked Jacob into bed, he asked me a question that almost brought me to tears. "Daddy, are you going to stay here with us forever?" I kissed his forehead and said, "I'll always be here for you, buddy. No matter what." I meant every word. No matter what the court decided. I wasn't going to let Lisa's choices dictate the kind of father I was going to be. I'd fight for Emma and Jacob with everything I had, because they deserved a parent who would never walk away. The morning of the hearing felt surreal. I woke up early, unable to sleep, and found myself pacing the house as the kids slept. Every scenario played out in my head: what Lisa might say, what accusation she might throw, and how the judge would react. I knew we were prepared, but the stakes were so high that the anxiety felt unbearable. When it was time to leave, I hugged Emma and Jacob tightly. I told them I was running an errand and would be back later. They didn't know what was happening, and I wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. They didn't need to bear the weight of this fight. At the courthouse, I met Mike, who gave me a reassuring nod. Lisa was already there, sitting with her lawyer. She looked put together, her hair styled and her makeup flawless, but I knew her well enough to see the tension in her posture. For a brief moment, I wondered if she was scared. Then I reminded myself that she had chosen this path. The hearing started with opening statements. Lisa's lawyer painted her as a loving mother who had made some mistakes but was willing to do whatever it took to repair the family. He emphasized that keeping the children with both parents was in their best interest. When it was Mike's turn, he laid out the facts. He didn't attack Lisa's character directly, but focused on her actions: the cheating, the abandonment, the reckless behavior. He argued that her instability made her unfit to share custody at this time. He was calm, methodical, and relentless, presenting each piece of evidence like a carefully laid brick in a solid wall. Then came the testimonies. Jamie, the co-worker, delivered a damning account of Lisa's behavior at work, detailing her affair with Marcus and her disregard for professional boundaries. Lisa's lawyer tried to discredit her, but Jamie held her ground, her voice steady as she recounted what she had seen. When it was my turn to speak, I felt a lump in my throat as I approached the stand. I talked about Emma and Jacob, their routines, their needs, and how I had been the one to provide stability for them during this tumultuous time. I didn't dwell on Lisa's faults, but I made it clear that her actions had disrupted the family and hurt the children in ways they didn't fully understand yet. Lisa's turn came next. She cried on the stand, talking about how much she loved the kids and how she regretted her mistakes. But when questioned about her disappearance and her affair, her answers were evasive. At one point, the judge even stopped her to clarify. "So, Mrs. Taylor, you admit to leaving your children for several days without notifying anyone. Is that correct?" "Yes," she said quietly, wiping her eyes. But I needed space to think. I saw the judge make a note, her expression neutral but sharp. It gave me a glimmer of hope. The closing arguments were brief. Lisa's lawyer pleaded for leniency, emphasizing that her absence was temporary and that the children needed both parents. Mike countered by reiterating that my home had been the only constant for Emma and Jacob during this upheaval and that splitting custody would introduce unnecessary instability. The judge adjourned for deliberation, and we were left waiting in the courtroom. Those minutes felt like hours. Lisa stared straight ahead, her face unreadable, while I gripped the edge of the table, bracing for whatever was to come. When the judge returned, her decision was clear and firm. I was granted full custody of Emma and Jacob. Lisa would have supervised visitation for the time being, pending further evaluation of her fitness as a parent. The relief hit me like a wave. I had fought for my kids, and I had won, but the victory felt bittersweet. I wasn't celebrating Lisa's downfall. I was mourning the family we used to be and the toll this would inevitably take on Emma and Jacob. As we left the courtroom, Lisa glared at me, her eyes full of resentment. "You've destroyed everything," she hissed. "No, irreplaceably. I'm trying to protect what's left." I walked out of the courthouse with my head held high, knowing I had done what was right for my kids. But deep down, I knew the hardest part was still to come, helping them heal from the damage Lisa and I had caused. Winning custody felt like a step in the right direction, but it didn't mean the hard part was over. If anything, the weight of responsibility hit me even harder once the dust settled. Emma and Jacob were my world now, and I needed to shield them from the fallout of everything Lisa and I had gone through. The first week after the hearing was awkward, to say the least. Lisa was allowed supervised visitation twice a week, but the kids didn't seem excited about it. Emma, especially, was hesitant. "Why does Mommy need someone watching her when she's with us?" she asked one afternoon. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. The judge just wants to make sure mommy is okay and that everything is safe when you're together, I said. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. I hated keeping things from them. But how do you explain to an 8-year-old that their mother's actions had consequences? Jacob was too young to ask many questions, but he clung to me more than usual. Bedtime became a ritual of him wrapping his little arms around my neck and whispering, "Don't leave me, Daddy." Each time, it broke my heart. Lisa's first visit was a disaster. The kids were polite but distant, their natural warmth replaced by confusion and uncertainty. Lisa tried too hard to act normal, like nothing had happened, and they saw right through it. Emma barely spoke to her, while Jacob stuck to the supervising social worker like glue. Lisa left in tears, and I overheard Emma asking, "Why does Mommy cry so much now?" The reality of Lisa's absence hit harder as the weeks went on. I did everything I could to maintain a sense of normalcy, but there were moments when the cracks showed. Emma started having trouble sleeping, and Jacob had a meltdown when he couldn't find his favorite stuffed animal one night. I stayed up with both of them, reassuring them that everything would be okay, even though I wasn't sure myself. One night, Emma surprised me with a question I wasn't ready for. "Daddy, do you still love Mommy?" she asked as I tucked her into bed. I froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. "I'll always care about Mommy," I said finally. "She's your mom, and nothing will change that. But sometimes adults can't stay together the way they used to. It doesn't mean we love you or Jacob any less." She nodded, her big eyes searching mine. "I wish things could go back to the way they were." "So do I, sweetheart," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "But we'll make a new normal. I promise." The truth was, I didn't know if I could ever forgive Lisa. Her actions weren't just mistakes, they were choices. Choices that tore our family apart and left scars I wasn't sure would ever fully heal. But I also couldn't let my anger consume me. The kids needed stability, not bitterness, and I refused to let them carry the weight of my resentment. Slowly, we started finding our rhythm. I poured myself into being the best dad I could be, making their favorite meals, helping with homework, and planning little outings to give them something to look forward to. It wasn't easy, but every laugh, every hug reminded me why I was fighting so hard to move forward. As for Lisa, her visits continued, but the distance between her and the kids only grew. They were polite but guarded, their trust in her shaken in ways I didn't fully understand until one day Emma blurted out, "Why does Mommy keep saying everything is our fault?" I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "She said if we weren't so much work, maybe you and her wouldn't fight so much," Emma said, her voice small. "Is that true, Daddy?" My chest tightened, and I knelt down to look her in the eye. "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "None of this is your fault, Emma. Not even a little bit. Grown-ups make their own choices, and Mommy and I have made mistakes. But none of that is because of you or Jacob. Do you understand?" She nodded, but her expression told me she wasn't entirely convinced. I hugged her tightly, silently vowing to undo the damage Lisa's words had caused. Lisa's bitterness became more apparent with each visit. She blamed everyone but herself, me, the court, even the kids. It was like she couldn't accept that her choices had consequences. Watching her spiral only solidified my resolve. I wasn't going to let her drag the kids down with her. We were rebuilding little by little. It wasn't perfect, and the pain of what Lisa had done lingered like a shadow. But every day, I reminded myself that the kids were worth it. They deserved a parent who would fight for them, love them, and show them that even when life falls apart, it's possible to find a way forward. That was a Sunday afternoon when Lisa pushed things too far. Her supervised visits had been tense but manageable until now. That day, Lisa showed up late, looking disheveled and annoyed, as though seeing the kids was more of an obligation than a privilege. The social worker supervising the visit pulled me aside as Lisa walked in. "She's been late to the last 2 visits as well," the social worker said quietly. "We'll document it, but I wanted to let you know." I nodded, biting back my frustration. It wasn't about me, it was about the kids. But every little thing Lisa did felt like another reminder of how much she'd checked out as a mother. The visit started poorly. Lisa barely acknowledged Jacob, who ran to show her the picture he'd drawn in school. Instead, she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone. Emma tried to engage with her by asking questions about their next visit, but Lisa brushed her off, muttering something about not making promises. Then came the moment that broke me. Lisa turned to the social worker and said, loud enough for Emma to hear, "You see how hard this is? They don't even listen to me anymore. It's like they're as broken as this whole situation." Emma froze, her face crumpling as the words sank in. She turned to me, her eyes wide with confusion and hurt. "Am I broken, Daddy?" she whispered. I knelt down immediately, pulling her into a hug. "No, sweetheart, you are not broken. Don't you ever think that." My voice was calm, but inside, I was boiling with rage. I looked up at Lisa, my jaw tight. "You don't get to say things like that to them," I said, keeping my tone measured for the kids' sake. Lisa scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. She needs to toughen up." The social worker stepped in, her voice firm. "Mrs. Taylor, I think it's time to wrap this visit up early." Lisa looked taken aback, but she didn't argue. She grabbed her bag and stood up, muttering something under her breath as she walked out the door. I was too focused on comforting Emma to care what she had to say. After Lisa left, I took the kids out for ice cream, hoping to distract them from what had happened. But Emma's question stayed with me, replaying in my head over and over. Lisa's words had cut deeper than I could have imagined, and I knew I couldn't let this continue. The next morning, I called my lawyer. "We need to talk about terminating her visitation rights," I said. "I can't put the kids through this anymore." Mike didn't hesitate. "I think you have a case," he said. "The abandonment, the inconsistent behavior, and now this, it's all adding up. The court will take the kids' emotional well-being into serious consideration." Filing to restrict Lisa's access to the kids felt like a last resort, but it was necessary. I couldn't let her keep damaging them, not when I'd fought so hard to give them a sense of stability. They deserved better than a mother who saw them as a burden or a bargaining chip. When Lisa found out about the motion, she called me in a fury. "You can't do this to me," she screamed. "They're my kids too." "They're your kids," I said coldly, "but you've treated them like they're nothing more than pawns in your game. If you want to be in their lives, you need to prove you deserve it." Her response was predictable. "This is all your fault," she spat. "You've poisoned them against me." I didn't argue. Lisa wasn't capable of hearing the truth, and I wasn't going to waste my energy trying to make her understand. This wasn't about her feelings. It was about protecting Emma and Jacob. The motion to restrict her visitation rights would take weeks to process, but I felt a sense of relief just knowing it was in motion. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of the situation instead of reacting to it. In the meantime, I focused on rebuilding our lives. I signed Emma up for art classes and started taking Jacob to a nearby soccer league. Watching them laugh and play felt like a glimpse of the future, a future where they could heal, where they could thrive without the weight of Lisa's chaos hanging over them. Lisa had made her choices, and now I was making mine. My kids came first, no matter what, and I was determined to give them the life they deserved, even if it meant closing the door on Lisa for good. The day of the court hearing, to finalize the motion restricting Lisa's visitation, arrived faster than I expected. By then, I was exhausted, not just from the legal battle, but from the emotional toll of holding everything together for Emma and Jacob. Still, I knew I was doing the right thing. The kids' well-being came first, and I'd do whatever it took to protect them. In court, Lisa was a shadow of her former self. Her once polished demeanor was gone, replaced by a defensive, erratic energy. She tried to argue that I was alienating her from the kids, but the evidence spoke for itself. Her repeated absences, late visits, and emotional outbursts painted a clear picture of someone who wasn't ready to prioritize her children. The judge listened carefully, reviewing everything my lawyer had submitted: testimony from the social worker, Lisa's history of neglecting the kids, and her toxic remarks during visitation. When it was time for me to speak, I focused on Emma and Jacob, on how much they'd been through and how much they needed consistency and stability to heal. The ruling came quickly. The judge decided in my favor, reducing Lisa's visitation to monitored phone calls only. In-person visits would only be reconsidered after a full evaluation by a family therapist. Lisa's face crumpled as the judge read the decision. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity, but it was drowned out by relief. I'd done what I needed to do to protect my kids. After the hearing, Lisa didn't say a word to me. She walked out of the courtroom without looking back, her lawyer trailing behind her. It felt like the final chapter in a story that had dragged on far too long. That night, as I sat on the couch with Emma and Jacob, watching one of their favorite movies, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. For the first time, I could breathe. The constant tension, the uncertainty, the fear of what Lisa might do next, it was gone. I looked at my kids, laughing and snuggling under a blanket, and realized that we were finally moving forward. The weeks that followed were the beginning of a new chapter for us. I enrolled in a co-parenting class to help me navigate life as a single dad. I started therapy, too, finally addressing the anger and pain Lisa's betrayal had left behind. It wasn't easy, but each step forward felt like progress. Emma began to open up more during her art classes, creating colorful paintings that she proudly displayed on the fridge. Jacob, once so clingy and afraid, started making friends at soccer practice, his confidence slowly returning. Watching them grow and heal reminded me why I'd fought so hard for them. They deserved this: happiness, stability, and a parent they could count on. As for Lisa, the monitored phone calls were sporadic at best. Some weeks, she didn't call at all. When she did, the conversations were brief and awkward, more about her than the kids. I didn't push her to do more. It wasn't my job to fix her. My only focus was on Emma and Jacob, on being the dad they needed. One evening, after tucking the kids into bed, I sat alone in the quiet of the house. The photos on the wall, our family vacations, birthday parties, and holiday celebrations, felt like relics of another life. For a moment, I let myself grieve for the family we used to be, for the love I thought I'd had with Lisa. But then I looked at the future ahead of me, at the life I was building with my kids, and I realized I wasn't stuck in the past anymore. Lisa's choices had broken something in me, but they hadn't destroyed me. If anything, they had forced me to grow stronger, to fight harder, and to value the things that truly mattered. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: Emma and Jacob would always have me, no matter what. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I felt a quiet sense of hope. Life had knocked me down, but I was standing again. And this time, I wasn't standing alone.